Hey, welcome back to the Table Talk Podcast. I am Caleb, and I'm here with David today. David, it is Monday of Thanksgiving week. We are just a few days away from what I would call the Super Bowl of eating, personally. And this is typically the day that I begin my 3-day cleanse to try and get ready for everything I'm going to eat on Thursday. How do you feel about Thanksgiving this week?
I'm so excited about it. One of my favorite holidays.
Yeah,
right?
Same.
I think probably a lot of people's one of their favorite holidays.
Yeah.
Getting together with family and tons of food, and it's a great time to be thankful, and it's one that I have a lot of really good memories about.
Same. Yeah, I love Thanksgiving. My family has always done it out of my great aunt and uncle's farm. So Thanksgiving's, looking at horses, throwing football in the yard, like just all kinds of that kind of stuff. And it's just always been a really good memory for me.
Yeah, for sure. Watching some football games.
Watching a little football.
Else. So great time to be around a table.
Absolutely.
Which has been our sermon series for 4
weeks. Yeah, this past Sunday, yesterday was the last day.
4 weeks, and I think you brought your best one yet
well,
yesterday. I
thanks.
heard a lot of people say they loved it. It made an impact on them, and which is always good to hear when you give a sermon. And I know you wouldn't say, "Well, it was all me." You would say it's the story that brings out the beauty of what God does. And you told a story about David and his best friend Jonathan about how there's tension there, how there could have been hard feelings and all that, but yet God shows in this really cool way about coming around a table and what that means. Tell a little bit about your sermon so that if you didn't catch it, go back and listen to it. Great sermon, worth the listen. So you'll learn something really cool and see something really cool from inside the Bible.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's not anything I said. It's the story. It's the power of what God did. And in that story, it's so crazy because if you don't know the Old Testament, like most of that middle piece of the Old Testament is like the story of David and the narrative of how David becomes king. And David had this tension with Saul, who was the king before him, who was also his father-in-law. David was married to Saul's daughter, Michal. And Saul's, the king, was also the father of David's best friend, Jonathan. And so Saul was the first king, and he kind of became arrogant and prideful and disobeyed God and Samuel the prophet several times. And so God actually took the kingdom from Saul and promised it to David. David was anointed as the next king, which made things really tense and difficult because, again, David's married to Saul's daughter. He's best friends with Saul's son. And Saul knows that David is next in line, in theory, and just tries to kill him. I mean, almost all of 1st and 2nd Samuel, at least 1st Samuel up to that point, is Saul hunting David down and trying to kill him. And the story that we read yesterday was how David, after Saul has died, after Jonathan has died, he is now king in Israel, and how he seeks out anyone left in Saul's family, not so that he can depose of them as other kings would have done at the time, but so that he could show kindness to them. And there's this beautiful story where we learn, where David learns, we've already been told earlier in the book, but David learns that there's a son of Jonathan, technically David's nephew, right at this point, Mephibosheth, who was 5 years old when his father and grandfather were killed in battle. And we read the story in 2 Samuel 4 that Mephibosheth's nurse tries to carry him away from danger. Yeah, say Mephibosheth 5 times fast and see how fast you get through it. Mephibosheth.
There you go.
Yeah.
You did it. Nailed it.
She tries to escape with him. Oh, dude, it's a tough name. And she tries to escape with him, and there's an accident. She falls, he injures both of his feet, and he's unable to walk for the rest of his life because of this incident. And David, kind of bucks the kingly tradition of eliminating potential threats or people with claims to the throne, and actually invites Mephibosheth to sit around his table as one of his sons. David, in this, this kind of chokes me up a little bit, but steps up and becomes the father for Mephibosheth that he didn't have. And just to think of, the beauty and the implication of that on David's half, this is my nephew, this is my best friend's son, but also for Mephibosheth to have kind of lived a life where he was probably afraid of David a little bit, kind of in hiding, kind of in fear of, what happens if he finds out I exist. And then just to be welcomed around the table every day. I mean, it says Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem and ate at the king's table all the days of his life. That's a beautiful story. And it's just such a picture of what God does for us and what he has done for us through Jesus. It gets me emotional, man. It's a really beautiful story.
It's one of the most beautiful stories.
It's one of my favorites.
And it's one of promises kept. And there's ones of redemption and stories. It's a story that shows, like me, I'm a nobody. I'm just I am my father is Jesus says that our father is Satan until we accept him as our father, right? Like we're of this world until we accept him, and that's where I was, right? Like that, I was fallen. I was by all rights, I should be in hell. I should be in hell, and for the sins that I have freely committed. Yet that's not what we have.
Right.
We have a Messiah that came and redeemed me, that came back and put me back in the place that God created us to be in. And it's just a beautiful story, and one that should drive us to think about our value.
Yeah, for sure.
One that should drive us to 100% think of what we are worth and why we are valuable and things like that. It's an incredible story for that. Yeah. It's an incredible story of bringing people around a table, which is perfect on theme.
Yeah, man, it really is. Like when you think about it, Mephibosheth, when he's presented before David, and David says, I want you to come around my table. I want you to eat with me. Mephibosheth says, what am I that you care about me? I'm a dead dog. Like that's literally the phrase he uses. He calls himself a dead dog. And that, that broke me a little bit too, because, there's so many of us, at different points in our life that view ourselves that way. And we see ourselves as worth less. Yeah. But when the king says, no, you are worthy of grace and mercy, and you're worthy of this fellowship at my table, and that just changes everything. And it's exactly what God does for us through Jesus. And in some ways, Mephibosheth is right. Like his family's dead. Yep. He is, and this is no sign of his worth as a person, but he's physically incapable of doing much through no fault of his own, but just physically incapable. Yeah.
And specifically at that time, it was even bigger of a deal.
Oh, of course, yeah. So yeah, I mean, thank goodness we're at a point today where we have wheelchairs and we have things for folks that do struggle with disabilities. In the ancient world, if you had a disability, you're in a tough spot. Yep. And I love too that, and this is consistent throughout Scripture, that God ascribes so much value to the people that the world sees as valueless. Yes. And so this is a case of that. There's, again, so many stinking layers to this story. Yeah. But for Mephibosheth, he's welcomed and he's declared worthy by David, by the king. And just like what you said for us, we looked at Romans 5 yesterday too. While we were enemies of God, we were reconciled to him. Yeah. So how much more then will we be reconciled through the new life that we've been given as his children? And so, yeah, it is one of those things where it's like we're undeserving, we're unworthy, but despite all of that, God still calls us to himself and places us at his banquet table. And it's such good stuff. It's
a beautiful story. You gave a little bit of a hint towards it this last weekend on our last podcast. Yeah. So when you listen to the podcast, it pays off.
You get a little spoiler.
You get a little bit of a hint of like, oh, this is one of Caleb's favorites, and you said this is one of your favorite stories for a good reason. Yeah, I mean, it's like it's a beautiful story, and it's just one that just Christ shines through. Yeah, like when you're looking for Christ in the Old Testament, this is like a beautiful representation.
Perfect snapshot. I mean, this is probably, I think I said this yesterday, this is probably the text that I've preached on the most, honestly, like just in different places. Like, if somebody asked me to come preach at their church, I usually go in with this because I'm like, this is just the gospel. Like this is just, this is the good news. And it is one of those things where I believe you can see Jesus in all the Old Testament. If you want a little more insight or spoiler baseball, whatever, I kind of prefer the Old Testament. And it's not because I don't like the New Testament. I just think the puzzle pieces are fascinating. Yeah. And I think Jesus is the payoff, and he's the ultimate payoff. Yeah. And obviously, the New Testament is beautiful because of that. But the Old Testament, to see how God arranged and worked and moved over 2,500 years, and really longer than if you go back to Adam and Eve, but just talk about the history of Israel, right? That time period, it's beautiful.
And how Jesus is just the key that
unlocks the whole thing.
He makes it all make sense. Like I know I've said this during a sermon here before. It's like a shadow, the sun coming over, and like it's this weird shape. And like in the morning, you see your shadow; it's all stretched out, and you can't tell what it is. And it could be a tree or it could be anything, but you just start getting these little hints of what it is. And the closer we get to Jesus, to Jesus's time, the clearer it becomes. It's like, oh, there's a man that's God.
Yeah.
He's coming.
Yeah.
And he's going to be born in Bethlehem. Just a little bit more clarity. And he's going to be the Prince of Peace. And he's going to be killed for our sins and transgressions. And he's going to take those on himself. And it gets clearer and clearer and clearer until you see Jesus. And then it's like the sun's behind him. And not only can you see him and his face, but it unlocks.
Yes.
You go, oh, that's a finger. That's the hand. That's the, like you start seeing these things that you're like, just look strange and hard. Like, how do these even connect? And then you put Jesus into those, and it's like, holy cow. Like, just a beautiful, he's the key to the whole thing. And it'd be so confusing without him. And it'd be hard to reconcile and not make it all work. But then you put Jesus in there, and it's like everything unlocks.
Yes. I mean, that is, to get theologically cute with it, it's like, I believe the reason why, at least for me, my Christology is so high is because of that. I mean, it truly is, the whole thing points to him. The Bible is this collection of 60 plus books, 40 plus authors, multiple languages, multiple genres over centuries. But it's one story that points to Jesus, and Jesus is the key to the whole thing. And so it really is just, and I think, John says that in John 1, by him all things were made, and there is nothing that has been made that wasn't made through him. It's like he is the centerpiece. He is the key. He is the linchpin of all creation. And it's just, again, you see stories like this, and it is just that shadow, that the theological term is a type, right? A type of what's to come. And it's just really beautiful. And I don't know, I could talk about this story all day because it truly does, it truly means that much to me.
Yeah. And to get down to me, what I think would be to get down to something good, which would be a practical, like for us, like what practically for us, I think this does several things. What are some things for you that you think practically this helps us with when we're around the table this week, when a lot of people are gathering around a table with family? Some people may not be gathering around a table with family. That may be one of the things that they're struggling with right now, is they're not able to do that. So practically, what does this do for people who are going into this week? Some people super excited, super happy, and some people in a little bit of a struggle.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, it's okay to admit that. Like, and we've said this on here before, sometimes the most holy thing you can do is just acknowledge reality. And actually, sometimes the task of the follower of Jesus is to acknowledge reality, because we live in a world that doesn't want to. We live in a world that wants to put on masks and pretend and think everything's okay, when it's like, in reality, no, the true spiritual task might be to name reality for what it is. And the reality is, for some of us, like you said, this week is exciting and fun, and for others, it's hard. For a multitude of reasons. But, I think practically speaking, regardless of what your table situation looks like this week, the first thing is to root yourself in the belief and the trust and the truth that you are deemed worthy by God. That God, through Christ, has declared you right and righteous, and you are welcomed and invited to his table at all times. That was one of the things that we said yesterday was, I hope that everyone feels when they sit down at a table Thursday, that they feel invited and welcomed and celebrated. That may not always be the case, but with God it is. And at his table, you are always invited and welcomed and celebrated. So I think just the first thing is just rooting yourself in that is so important. The second piece of that is, and this is kind of the main point of the sermon, was we welcome others as God has welcomed us. And I think the beautiful piece of that in the story is, Everybody else calls Mephibosheth a cripple. Everyone else says, oh, he was lame in both feet. The narrator, Ziba, the servant, they all say, hey, there is this guy, but he's lame in both feet. There is this guy, but he's crippled. Like, that's just, they always use that. David doesn't say that. David just calls him by his name, just calls him Mephibosheth. He doesn't say, hey, Meph, buddy, I know like you kind of can't walk, but it's all good. He says, Mephibosheth, you were at my table. And I think that's such a beautiful picture of how God sees us in Christ. We see ourselves often through the labels we give ourselves, or the labels that people give us, or the mistakes we've made, or the sins we've committed, or whatever. And it's just kind of this aura that surrounds us of like negativity and labels. But God, through Christ and through his love for us, is able to look through that and just see us. And so that's, again, rooting ourselves in that, but also applying that to other people. That when you sit down this week, or if there are tensions in your family or whatever, you know, we're so often caught up in that aura around people of their past or their mistakes or their sins or their things that they do that frustrate or annoy us about their personality. And I think the challenge is really to try to look through that and go, I just want to see the person. Yeah. I just want to see the person. And you know, their actions may frustrate or disappoint me in XYZ ways, but at the end of the day, they're a person just like me. And if God sees them as one of his children, then I should see them as that too.
Yep. Yep. Maybe to sum that part of it up is like, view yourself as a child of God. Mm-hmm. Understand that. Know it. View the person sitting to your left or right. View your uncle that comes in with his camper and puts sewage down in the drain.
It's full, Clark.
It is. I'm getting into Christmas music or Christmas movie season.
It starts Friday.
It does. So we're already decorating here. Mm-hmm. So like when they pull in and you're struggling with whatever that is remember they're children of God. Okay? Mm-hmm. They are created. They are valuable because God created them and put his image on them. Yeah. And which is just a beautiful thing, a beautiful thing. Could I give a challenge that that Brittany and I have also been challenged with a little bit this week? It's less about your sermon, more about being thankful and for those around us. For us, we have started saying in our prayers, thank you for the privilege, God, of things. When things are hard, when people are hard, change the narrative from like, I'm just trying to wrestle with this person or trying to make this where these people are frustrating me so bad, to thank you for the privilege to be able to have these people in my home. Thank you for the privilege. And for an example, you eat too much, your stomach's upset, you're not feeling good. Maybe you say, thank you for the privilege that it is to be able to eat so much. Yeah. That I don't feel good. That's a huge privilege. Or maybe you and your kid or your son or daughter or whatever are having some strife. You say, thank you for the privilege to have this child that I can have this with. Yeah. And what's that done for me is that has helped me elevate other people and stuff. Yeah. And also to keep my mind in a good place and to help remember all the blessings even through all those hardships. And that's kind of been a big deal for me like the last 2 weeks. Brittany told me that, and I was like, oh, what a cool way of thinking about it. And for me, that's been a big blessing for me in my prayer life. So like I said, I know it's not exactly what
that's
right
a great
on sermon.
Challenge.
It's just for me that's been a big help.
Yeah, I think that's great. And especially as we get into this holiday season, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, like there probably are a lot of, privileged struggles, some of us might enter into. And I think just framing it like that's really important and really helpful.
Thank you for the privilege to have a car that I'm stuck in traffic in. Thank you for the privilege of having a home that's too tight to fit everybody in it. Like to have those things or to have so much family that it feels tight in here. Like those type of things for me is like, it's a way to reroute those things. And I didn't want to take us too far off topic.
No, that's great.
But before Thanksgiving, I was like, oh man, for me, it's been a big game changer.
Yeah, it is for sure. Well, I think, I hope everyone has a great Thanksgiving. I hope that it, again, I hope you feel welcomed and celebrated and invited. And I hope you're thankful for those difficult privileges. But know that you're so loved by God. Yeah. And I think that's just, and we'll see that as we move into Advent season next week of like just how much you are loved by God. The fact that Christ comes in the form of a baby, not just in the form of as a baby. I think sometimes we like missed it. No, he like came, like he pooped his diaper and cried and stuff like that, you know? And it just changes so much. So I'm really excited to dig into that starting next week.
Yeah, that's going to be awesome. Church is starting to transform into the Christmas season. Yep. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, you and me both. We'll pick it back up next week.
I'm excited about it.
Me too. All right, thanks for listening to the Table Talk podcast. We'll see you guys next week.